Hello everybody and thank you for joining me. This is Ciara from Ciara T Designs, and today I have a video for you on the ScrapbookPal YouTube channel. So let's jump right in. So for this card I am going to watercolor with distress inks, but I am using a piece of cold press watercolor paper, and I'm using a water proof ink here, and I'm going to stamp it down twice with my Misti. That is the reason I use the Misti, is because this cold press paper is quite textured, and I really wanted to get a good impression, so I did use a Misti to stamp this down. So I stamped it twice on and it's the textured side of the cold press watercolor paper. You can always get, there's like a textured side and a softer side or a smoother side on the watercolor paper, but I like the textured side, so I just kind of lean that direction. You could use either for this technique, so it works really well. And I'm going to use a bunch of different distress inks. I have Pumice Stone and Hickory Smoke, which is what I'm going to kind of color in the cats. And for the stamp set, I'm using the Colorado Craft Company Dad's Cooking stamp set. And this is the big image out of that stamp set. And I just think it's so adorable. This is a birthday card for my husband. His birthday is this month in July, and we have a few cats, and we used to foster for the SPCA, and we just love cats, so I thought this was super fitting. So this this stamp set is probably a Father's Day stamp set. It has some sentiments that would be really good for Father's Day cards, but it also has birthday sentiments and a couple of other sentiments that you could use for other occasions. So it's pretty versatile that way, and if you love cats, this is a pretty amazing stamp set. Also, my husband does pretty much all of the cooking. I'm really lucky that way, so I thought this was very fitting for his birthday. So I started out with Pumice Stone, and I just stamped it onto a slick surface, and I've got the Tim Holtz Detailer water brush, and I'm just using that because it's got such a fine tip, so it's really easy to get in and do layers of your color and kind of get them where you want them to be. If you're concerned about watercoloring, I know some people don't enjoy it, you could absolutely emboss the image, and then you don't have to worry about your water running, or if your ink isn't quite dry or anything like that, because then you'd have those ridges that would help keep the color inside the image. So that's absolutely an option. In this, I didn't do that. I just stamped it down and I'm going to watercolor it, but that's completely an option if you're ever concerned. There's a couple of tricks for that. So I'm just going to use the Pumice Stone to do my first layer here, and I'm just kind of doing a light wash, and then I brought in Hickory Smoke. And I'm going to do the third little, or the second, I guess it's the second kitten, but the third little cat with that color. I opted to kind of do grays for this card. I kind of did a more muted color palette for this card, actually, just because I was trying to kind of get more of a masculine feel, as it is for my husband. So I kind of was trying to stay away from super bright colors, which is my norm. Not that men don't appreciate super bright colors. I was trying to channel a little bit more of a masculine feel for my card. So I just kind of laid down a wash of the color, and this isn't difficult coloring, or watercoloring in this case. It's just kind of laying down one color kind of in the area that I wanted in, and then adding a little bit of shadowing later. So there's not a lot of specific layers to the color. And then I came in with Vintage Photo, and I have the minis here just because I don't have a huge space, so they're a lot easier for me, but the big ink pads would work just as well. You could use the oxides if you wanted to do that. If you have the reinkers, you could use those. Of course, you could use traditional watercolors if that's what you prefer. I happen to love the distress inks for this because the colors are so vibrant, even though you're adding water, and they're water reactive as well, so you can do some different techniques that way. But I like watercoloring with my distress inks. I find it takes some of the guesswork out of picking colors, or worrying about the color not mixing well, or worrying about it being too light or too dark. It just kind of works quite easily. So I used the Vintage Photo on that pancake there, and you can see that I kind of gave it a darker layer on the bottom, just so it kind of looked like it had just flipped out of the pan. And then I also used the Vintage Photo on the little checkered pants. I have a tendency to use a color multiple times in the same image. I find that repeating colors can be very cohesive in your design, and I think that that's one of the easiest ways to make a very cohesive card. You pick, like I think in this case I used 5 colors altogether, 2 of which were gray, and then that's kind of all I used. So if you use them in a few different areas, then it kind of pulls the whole card together, the whole color palette together. At least that's something that I kind of go with. I found that it's worked pretty well for me. So I did use the vintage photo in the pants. And then for a little color, because I do love color, I brought in Speckled Egg. And I'm going to put that on the pants as well, and then on the little bow ties for the little kittens. I think that it turned out pretty great. I'd love to know what you guys think. I love how this card turned out, to be honest. I think that it's not my usual style. If you've seen some of the other videos I've done on this channel, it's a bit different than I usually do, but I love how it turned out, and I cannot wait for my husband to see it and see what he thinks of it. So I had to actually hide it from him this morning because he came up to look at the card that I'd made, and I had to hide it so he couldn't find it. But so he hasn't seen it yet. But yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. And I just put it on the bow ties and on the pants just for a pop of color. I believe actually, sorry, I also put it on the handle of the frying pan just to add a little more color there. And then for the little hat, the little chef's hat and the jacket, I used antique linen. I really wanted it to be a bit off-white because, I mean, white would be like you've never used it before. And because my husband cooks constantly, I really wanted it to look like it was a well-used jacket and hat. Like it was well loved and used constantly, and it was something that they really loved. So I kind of went for that antique linen color. But you, of course, again, you could color this in any color palette, and I think that this image would look stunning. This is just kind of the direction that I went and the color palette that I chose. And I did go quite light in the jacket. I really added a lot of water. So you can see when I want more water and less color, I'll blot it off on the piece of paper towel I have sitting off to the side there, and then just kind of pull the color out with water instead of adding more color. That's just for a lighter wash of color. You could, of course, add more layers and add more depth. I didn't give it a lot of layering, mostly just because I wanted it to be a bit of a simpler coloring, just because I think the images really pop, and I didn't want to over-saturate it with tons and tons of color. And then if you get an area where you have too much water and it's trying to bleed, or it's too much color, like I just used there, I just blotted it up with my piece of paper towel. And that just removes either a little bit of color or a little bit of water, depending on what you have too much of. That also will work if you end up coloring out of the lines. You could add a little bit water on top and then kind of lift it up with the paper towel. I mean, it doesn't work perfectly every time because if the color starts to dry, it's not easy to lift off the paper, but that is a way to, if you've got the water or the color bleeding out, you can kind of clean it up. So I have a little bit more of hickory smoke there, and I'm just going to add that into the pan just to kind of create a metal look. Because it is the grays. I am really hoping that Tim Holtz maybe comes out with a new gray. We only have pumice stone and hickory smoke, and I love grays. I think they go with any color palette you want to use. So I'm really hoping he brings out a new one, but we'll see when he brings out the next set of colors. But I love grays. So my fingers are crossed for a gray and a purple, but we'll see what he brings out. And I'm just kind of finishing up the coloring there. I am going to bring in that hickory smoke on the bottom as well to give them more shadows than they have in the image, just so it kind of looks like there's some depth to where they're standing. This is an added feature, but I think that it really adds to the look of it. Like, it kind of grounds the images and makes it look like they're actually standing there rather than kind of floating a little bit in the air. And I did bring in a white gel pen. I love to add highlights to my images, so that's kind of what I was doing here. This is an added thing. It's not necessary. I mean, I think it looks stunning the way it is. I just find that a little bit of highlighting adds a lot of more depth to your image. Now, if I was a little bit better at watercoloring, I would leave some areas white of the paper, and then that would be your highlight. However, I haven't mastered watercoloring yet as much as I love it, so I kind of I bring in a gel pen and just add a little bit. But you could absolutely do this with gouache or many other projects that are out there. This is just what I chose to use in this instance, but you can absolutely add highlights any way you like, or be better at leaving the white of the paper than I am. And then in this same stamp set, there is a happy birthday sentiment, which is I'm using right here. And I just stamped that down twice, again, because of the very textured cold press watercolor paper. And then I lift it out and I'm looking at it and I think that it looks great. And then I decide to glue it down, and then I'm going to add the lines here in a second. So I don't know if you guys know about this kind of little trick here. It's where you use your scoring, well, in this case it's a Scor-buddy, and if you have a card panel that's the exact same size as the base, which in this case is an A2 size, and I left it the full size, I actually stick it in the corner there, and then I get to adhere it perfectly to the card front. And I think that's a great little trick there. And I figured it needed a little bit of a border. So I brought in just a black pen out of my stash and just hand drew a border. I do intentionally make the line wavy. That was completely intentional. And it's only just to add a little more whimsy. And because of the art of the stamp, it is a bit sketchy and a bit whimsical. So I thought that that would fit really well. And I loved how that turned out. I think it turned out super cool. It's something I've never done before, but I think it really added to the final image. So I would love to know what you guys think. Leave us a like, leave us a comment, and please consider subscribing. There is a lot of amazing creators on this channel, and I think that you guys would find a lot of amazing work here. So thank you so much, guys, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye for now.